IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police force. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Police Chowki. While the criminal justice system takes care of a criminal after a crime has occurred, it is important from both a societal and public policy standpoint that crimes do not take place in the first place. This is good not only in terms of averting the damage to life, property, and society that a crime can cause, but also effective crime prevention will help law enforcement agencies and criminal courts, which are already starved of resources and capacity, and give them a breather. So what is crime prevention? Crime prevention is defined as the total of all private initiatives and state policies other than the enforcement of criminal law aimed at the reduction of damage caused by acts defined as criminal by the state. In other words, crime prevention involves any activity by an individual or group, public or private, which attempts to eliminate crime prior to it occurring or before any additional criminal activity happens. So with this background in mind, I would like to invite our guest on Police Chowki today, Mr. Javeed Ahmad, former IPS officer and DGP of Uttar Pradesh. Good to have you back, Mr. Ahmad, and welcome to Police Chowki.
Good morning, Shri. It's always a pleasure to be back. Thank you, Shri, for this episode on predictive policing. It's always nice to be back, and I hope this particular podcast gives our listeners some idea of the science and the thought process behind what is normally seen as routine police work. So over the next half an hour or so, I hope that our listeners will get some idea about how the police works, the processes behind the actual policing on the street.
Right. I want to begin by talking a little bit about the traditional methods of crime prevention which have been practiced in Indian societies, because preventing crimes is not a new idea, right? Like, it's pretty obvious, and ever since crime existed, I'm sure the authorities have had in their back of minds strategies to prevent crime from taking place. So we see this playing out in our society in terms of many social customs, informal community structures, religious teachings, even local justice systems like panchayat and so on, which try and play a role in preventing crimes from occurring. And one thing which I can distinctly remember is, chowkidars in villages, from where I come from as well, where, one individual or a group of them by rotation is responsible for patrolling the village during the nights, so that, they can watch out for thieves and other criminals. How does the Indian police look at these, informal social structures of crime prevention which have been going on in the country, and, does the police leverage these options in its overall efforts at reducing and preventing crimes?
Yes. Before we go to the Indian context, let me go back a little to Sir Robert Peel, who was probably the person who started the London Metropolitan Police in 1829. And Robert Peel, when setting up this London Metropolitan Police, laid out 9 principles. And the first one of these was that prevention of crime is more important than catching a person after the crime has been committed. So that is how old the concept of preventing crime is. And subsequently, when the 1861 Police Act was passed in India, then Section 23 of that Act, which is still in force in our country, talks about the duties and responsibilities of the police, and the first thing that is mentioned is prevention of crime. Subsequently, there is the mention of detection of crime. Now, in present day circumstances, the United Nations, when it set up the Sustainable Developmental Goals, SDGs, one of those, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong, target 16 is for development of sustainable cities. And the sustainable cities goal envisages that these cities will be free of violence, and I would like to underline this, of fear of violence, especially in respect of women and children. So, what I'm trying to highlight here is that that preventive action of the police has always been very important, and B, that now in modern times, especially with increased urbanization and the increased presence of women in public spaces, including in India now, there is a need to focus more on the safety of women in public spaces and inside homes. We will talk about that in some detail later on. And it is also important to keep in mind that prevention of crime also now includes at the theoretical level the absence of fear. So the spectrum has been enlarged to that extent. So that's the first point I wanted to make. You had talked about the village chowkidar system and the traditional methods of preventive policing in India. The chowkidar system still exists in the rural areas of India. The police, as it is structured in India today, has a urban bias, in the sense that the number of policemen available in city and urban areas is much more than in the rural areas, which are, as you know, widespread and far flung. So the village chowkidar continues to be the first port of call, if I may say so, for the criminal justice system. There was a time when the village chowkidar was not so integrated into the system. I remember about 20, 30, 40 years ago, the village chowkidar had sort of fallen out of the system. But over the last 20 years or so, across the states, the role and the importance of the village chowkidar has once again been recognized. He has been once again kind of co-opted into the system. He gets paid much better now, and there are certain do's and don'ts for him about what he has to do and how frequently he has to visit the police station and inform the police station in charge about the goings on in the thana, in the village that he's in charge of. It's a semi-formal arrangement, but it's an arrangement that has worked very well, especially in the rural areas where the police force is spread very thin. The third point I would like to make is that in the traditional system of policing in India, there was what is called the Village Crime Notebook, the VCNB as it is called. And this Village Crime Notebook had details of all the crimes that had happened in a particular village over the years, and a list of the bad characters who were residing in that particular village, and their activities were annually checked and recorded. Now, obviously, this arrangement was predicted on the limited mobility of the criminal, and that he would operate in an area of 15, 20, 30 miles, and people will get to know about his activities. Now, obviously, with increased mobility and increased communication and all that, this system has very limited value. Criminals living in Chennai, for example, are known to be committing a particular kind of crime on trains in northern India, and criminals from northern India are operating in Gujarat. I mean, this is a trend that we have to understand. So the whole presumption on which the old system was operating is now outdated.
Right. I think one of the things which you said, which really struck me, was that we need to expand the definition of crime prevention to mean not just taking steps towards curbing crimes from happening, but to create an atmosphere where people can live without fear. That when you talk about freedom of fear, freedom from fear, or freedom. The kind of freedom that actually helps people to make decisions without any sort of fear whatsoever. I mean, that's a lofty goal to aspire for, and it's interesting how crime prevention is also one aspect of delivering that kind of safety in people's minds in modern society. Having said that, I wanted to get into some specifics of crime prevention strategies, and I thought let's start by talking about something called the evidence based policing, which is essentially a police methodology that involves using empirical research tools and scientific studies, which in turn are incorporated into practices and strategies of policing. So while there is a lot of discussion on evidence-based policing, especially in the West, and I think Indian police has also been slowly adapting this kind of policing. I want to know from you if you can set out the context well beforehand. That is, can you explain to us what evidence-based policing means? Maybe use some illustrations so that we all have a good understanding of what this essentially entails for the police.
Yes, evidence-based policing was a concept that was studied and started in America. A lot of study which went into it, especially in California and some parts of Chicago. And the basic concept behind evidence-based policing was that police resources should be channelized in areas that are more prone to crime. And whether a particular area is prone to crime or not was crunched out through analysis of the huge amount of data that police departments were able to access. And with increasing digitization of this data, this analysis of data became increasingly convenient and possible. So, predictive policing or evidence based policing is the application of analytical techniques, especially quantitative techniques, to identify likely targets for police intervention and prevention of crime and to solve past crimes. So, very broadly, that is how evidence-based policing became possible or became a tool for the police. In the context of India, with the implementation of the CCTNS, the Crime Control and Tracking Network, which is now implemented right across all the states of the country. There's huge amount of data available to the police forces to identify particular areas which are crime prone. Also, through that data, the police is also able to figure out who are the people who are the criminals who are operating in a particular area, and to identify also their acquaintances and their accomplices, not only in a particular area but in other areas. For example, a criminal from Bangalore could be traveling to Madras or Chennai, and there he would have a set of accomplices who would be operating with him. So if that data is available, so it helps the police target these bad characters or criminals in a more focused manner. Firstly, secondly, because the police now has an idea about where crimes are happening, or hotspots as they are called, the human resources and the other resources available to the police, which are always in short supply, can be used in a more scientific manner, so that rather than spread out the police force across the jurisdiction, there's a concentration of effort in those areas which are identified as hotspots or more crime prone. That broadly is the framework in which evidence-based policing is operating. Now, in the context of India, there have been attempts and experiments to use evidence-based policing and predictive policing to deliver better services as far as the police is concerned. But as yet, I have not come across any study to assess the impact of these interventions on the quality of services or the quality of policing that has that could give us an idea about how effective it has been in the Indian context.
Right. So I think some of the things that you touched upon reminded me of this broken window theory, right? I think this was in vogue at some point in the US back when predictive policing was just coming up. And the idea was that, in neighborhoods with more broken windows, there are more chances of crimes occurring. So more police forces were devoted to patrolling these areas, cracking down upon any small kind of criminal infractions, and essentially maintaining a very tight policing presence. Of course, today times have changed. You don't have to look for broken windows to make this sort of resource allocation, but rather you have advanced technologies that can be deployed, starting from geospatial tech to CCTVs, just criminal data from over the years, all of which can be analyzed to predict whether a certain area is prone to criminal activities or not. So I want to ask something specific to this crime analysis that I was just describing. Has the Indian police been successful at crime analysis? Is there a concerted effort within police departments to now allocate resources based on these kind of needs, rather than just arbitrary or ad hoc allocation of police personnel?
Yes, as I said, the efforts towards predictive policing and evidence-based policing have been made, especially in bigger cities like Mumbai and Delhi and a few others in Hyderabad, for example. But as I said, there is no such study as yet to understand the impact of these efforts and whether those experiments or those interventions were done in the best possible manner or not. Till such time as some study comes to assess the impact of these efforts, we have to go on anecdotal evidence. Unfortunately, the anecdotal evidence is mixed at best. Why I say that is because while the identification of hotspots to understand where crime is taking place uh, is more reliable, because that is based on empirical fact of a crime having taken place in a particular area, whether it is a burglary or a snatching or a particular area which is vulnerable to women being stalked or girls being harassed. While that part of it, the identification of hotspots is slightly easier. The other aspect of trying to identify who the criminal could be or has been has certain problems. This has been studied in the West, and I'm sure that the same results would come out in the case of India as well, where because of the police biases, the people who are identified as possible the criminals who could have done a particular crime, that data itself is dodgy, and as a result, the results that come out of those analytical efforts are subject to some kind of doubts. I'll give you an example. In the US, for example, when they did this exercise, they realized that there was a very large percentage of people of color and people from and illegal immigrants who were targeted for all sorts of crimes, which ultimately it was found out they had not committed. In the case of India, also there have been instances where the identification of criminals who could have committed particular crimes has got colored by the fact that the police data itself has inherent biases against Dalits, tribals, and other vulnerable people, especially those who live in slums and those who do not have substantial voice. Thirdly, in the case of India and in the case of certain geographies in the West as well. Unfortunately, the power of surveillance and the power of scientific and technological intervention has come in the way of of people protesting against civic wrongs. There have been cases, for example, in India, where individuals who had gone in support of a dharna or a protest in some matter, just because they were present at a particular site, not necessarily as participating, but just present, and they came and their faces came up in the surveillance. They have been targeted because there was evidence, as far as the technical part of it goes. There was evidence that they were there. Whether they were there to just have a look or to participate or to indulge in violence was kind of looked over. So while predictive policing and evidence-based policing has its obvious plus points, these biases need to be always kept in mind, and we have to be slightly more judicious when using this kind of technology and data.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Right. Of course, I think we have spoken about the ill effects of surveillance and the infringement of rights that mass surveillance can cause earlier on the series as well. But I want to limit today's discussion on surveillance at least to one aspect, which is, tracking offenders, because criminal activities generally tend to be committed more by previous offenders, those with a criminal track record. And this is come out in many studies that if you are able to sort of like identify these repeat offenders and sort of prevent them from committing criminal activities, then it goes a long way in crime prevention. And I believe CRPC also has certain age-old provisions, regarding proclaimed offenders or externment, which is tadi par kar dena, is essentially banishing a person from a particular jurisdiction for a particular period of time. And then there are, history cheaters. Many states have enacted Gunda Acts and so on, which keeps a record of all the history cheaters, which is rowdies in that local police jurisdiction. So having said all that, I still believe we have not been able to track this problem of we have not been able to crack this problem of tracking offenders, because recently there were some discussions in the high courts of the country as to whether there can be a bail condition of an accused which asks him to share his WhatsApp location with the police all the time. Now, if this a violation of privacy, or is this justified? Because some jurisdiction also use things like electronic anklets to keep track of people who are out on bail and so on. So I wanted to know your thoughts on essentially this aspect of surveillance as to keeping track of offenders and repeat offenders, or these what we colloquially call the antisocial elements. So what is the problem here? Why are police not being able to crack this?
The short answer to that is that the law in India does not permit the kind of things that the West is doing. For example, of having electronic anklets that are that the person on bail has to wear, so that he does not move around beyond a particular area, and that he has to report to a police station at a particular frequency. There is no law which allows that kind of thing in India. So that is the short answer. Obviously, as you mentioned, there are issues of privacy, and there are issues of freedom of movement and all that which are involved. So the Indian courts have not yet allowed that kind of intervention by the police. Surveillance through other methods, especially the tracking of the mobile phone, which almost every criminal is using, is something that happens. But it does not happen on a 24/7 basis, because that has also been frowned upon by the courts. The courts feel that if a person is wanted in a crime, you can track him. But if he's not wanted, and just because he's had a criminal past, does not mean that the police has the power to keep tracking him on a 24/7 basis. This is especially true in case of organized crime criminals. Let us differentiate between those who are committing crime in an organized manner as part of a gang or are habitual criminals, and others who are, if I can use that word, first-time criminals, or those who committed crime once or twice in their young age. For example, someone who's stalking at girls, or someone who's creating a ruckus on the street corner. So we have to differentiate between these two categories: the organized crime and the casual criminal, if I can use that word. So those who are in the organized crime category, the mobile phone and the tracking of these persons, done officially oblique unofficially, is a tactic that is used quite frequently. But more often than not, this is done off the records because the courts will not allow 24/7 tracking of such persons unless he is wanted in a particular crime. If he is wanted in a particular crime, then obviously this is a legitimate way of trying to figure out where he is so that he can be nabbed. If he's absconding, if he's absconding, then more options are available to the police.
Right. At this point, I want to move away from evidence-based policing and predictive policing that we have been talking about for the last 20-25 minutes, and actually bring into picture community policing, because community policing has also garnered quite a bit of attention, because these initiatives are seen to be bridging the gap between the police and the community, building trust and ensuring that the police are on side of the common people, the law-abiding citizens, and they are there to perform their public duties. So the people need not be distrustful of the police, but rather feel safe and secure in approaching them for their troubles and getting a resolution. So with this idea in mind, the police has also been seeking out volunteers within the communities, entrusting them with different functions and so on. And many state police forces in India have launched these kind of initiatives. And just to mention a couple of them, I think Kerala, at least if we were to believe the media reports, has run a very successful Janamaitri program where Kerala police has interacted with people on a regular basis, and it has resulted in an image makeover. And similarly, I think there were other initiatives in Maharashtra, such as Police Didi or Police Kaka, which was essentially targeted at building a good relationship between children who are vulnerable, who are at risk of criminal activities, and the police, right? And there was also another initiative in Tamil Nadu called the Friends of Police. But here, I think it ran into a bit of controversy after nearly 2 decades of existence, because some of the volunteers from Friends of Police were found to have engaged in the custodial death of 2 people who were arrested by police. So this created a lot of controversy, and questions were raised about the legality or desirability of such community policing initiatives. So I want to know from you, what has been the effort of police generally in terms of community policing? What do you think are the pros and cons of such initiatives? What have been the successes and failures? And do you think the police should persist with more such initiatives?
Let me go back again to Robert Peel, and one of the 9 principles that he had enunciated when he established the London Metropolitan Police in 1829 was that that the police has to recognize that their ability to prevent and detect crime depends on public approval of their existence, action, and behavior, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. He went on to say in his next principle that the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing the observance of law is one of the basic principles on which the police has to work. So what I'm trying to say is that the necessity and the importance of community approval of police action and community cooperation in police action is something that has been recognized, over 100 years ago, or almost 200 years ago. Now, the question is that why is the police not able to get that kind of support from the public. I think the best answer to that would be that the police across all geographies, and including in India, has been known to either misuse their authority, which is something that the community disapproves of, and rightly so, or it is seen as exercising its authority in a subjective manner. That is because of extraneous considerations. Those extraneous considerations could be any. It could be political interference. It could be money. It could be some other motivation that is non-objective, if I can use that word. So there is no doubt that the role of the community is both in making the police action more justifiable to the public. It is equally important for making the police efforts successful. And it is equally important for making the police authority more acceptable to the people whom they are intended to serve. In the case of India, you mentioned that the Kerala example or the Tamil Nadu example. Let me add to that by saying that in Uttar Pradesh, for example, they had what was called the Police Mitra system. Unfortunately, this system also ran into some controversy because the people who were appointed or nominated as police mitras became minor power centers in their own sense, because they had access to the police thana, and they used that access for to grind their own axes, including making money and for implicating innocent people in false cases and stuff like that. And also, it became a tool for political interference in the working of the police. Unfortunately, politics jumps into every aspect of the lives of Indians, and this is one such example where police mitras were made only if they had affiliation to particular political parties or leaders of political parties, with the result that the objectivity that was expected of them was lost. Therefore, while at a conceptual level, the involvement of the police of the community, is very important. At the real level, at the ground level, what happens is that those who get involved with the police as volunteers develop their own vested interests in a short period of time. And the result of this is that the real good Samaritan is forced to stay away because he doesn't want to get into all this.
Right. So I actually echo most of the concerns that you have raised on community policing, because when the state delegates its power to a third person, a private citizen, essentially the policing power is being delegated in some way to that person, then we need to be highly careful, because this is delegation without accountability, or powers without responsibility sort of a situation. And I do not know to what extent that is desirable, because there are more major problems to be solved in terms of police state capacity and so on, and that cannot be bridged with ad hoc solutions like engaging volunteers and so on. So having said that, I want to know from you the final thought on having a crime prevention law or policy for the country itself, because right now there is no general crime prevention law or policy at the union level or at the state levels. But of course, police forces have introduced many initiatives that we have discussed, which are targeted at crime prevention. So do you think the lack of a coordinated national or state level strategy is hurting India's crime prevention efforts?
I'm not sure whether a national level directive of this kind or a law of this kind would be possible in the federal system that we have in India, because some states may have different views about how they want to go about the preventive part of policing. Because obviously what would work in Meghalaya, for example, may not work in Gujarat, and what works in Haryana, for example, may not work in Bihar. That concern is valid, and the present and political environment where encroaching union centralization is an issue. I don't know whether in the short term that kind of effort is possible, but definitely at the state level there should be a more organized and well thought out, standard operating procedure, which kind of lists out the do's and don'ts for the police at the Thana level, so from the for the police to concentrate more on prevention and not only on detection, which unfortunately is the case now. Presently, police action is often reactive. After a crime has happened, they react to it, and rather than have a situation where there is effort to prevent a crime from happening. At this stage, I would like to introduce to you the impact of the emergency response systems that some states or have started. I'm talking about the 112 program that is in operation across the country. And this was a program that I started in 2016 in Uttar Pradesh, which I'm therefore aware of how it is working in some more detail. What has happened is that because now the Thana is not the only place that a public person can go to record his complaint, and he can record his complaint over the phone on 112 just by ringing up. The emergency response vehicle is able to come within a period of 10 to 15 minutes, depending upon the location of the complainant. What has happened is that a lot of domestic violence cases have been prevented or intervened into. For example, in 1 month in Uttar Pradesh, about 2,000 cases of domestic violence were reported over 112 by the victim, and all of these cases, or 99% of these cases, were attended to by the emergency response vehicles, which are patrolling the whole state at all times. And through these interventions, a lot of domestic violence issues were resolved. So when we had initially talked about the fear, removing fear being part of the prevention of crime, I think these attempts and these experiments and interventions have been very, very useful. The second thing that I want to, the second initiative that I want to mention is the thing called the 1090 or 1090 as it is called in Uttar Pradesh. This is a project that was started once again in 2014-15 in Uttar Pradesh, and it is meant to assist young girls and ladies who are being harassed and stalked on phone or on the streets. Once again, all they have to do is ring up 1090, and the process of identifying the person who was stalking them or harassing them on the phone or doing such things which create fear in their minds, that person is tracked and he's counseled. If he continues to harass that girl or individual, then he is then brought into the ambit of law and action is taken against him. So what I'm trying to say is that interventions of these kind have been made, and they need to be continued with more energy, so that they attend to those sections of people of our population, especially girls and women, who have till now not been able to access the criminal justice system to complain about the kind of harassment and fears that they have when they step out into the public space or even within their own households.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmad, for joining me on this episode to discuss crime prevention strategies, and hope to have you back on Police Chowki very soon once again.
Thank you, Sri. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.